This video is based on the knowledge of Dr. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis. Have you ever wondered to what extent you truly have control over your choices? What if I told you that, according to Freud, many of your decisions are not as free as you think? Yes, free will is a deeply debated concept. But what did Freud have to say about it? Get ready, because the answer might be more shocking than you imagine. What goes on in the depths of our mind? Are we really in charge of our actions, or are hidden forces manipulating us? Today, we will explore this mystery by questioning the idea of freedom and examining what science and Freud can teach us about our power of decision. When you make a decision, such as choosing between coffee or tea, you believe you are acting with complete freedom of choice, right? However, science has been telling us for some time that things are not that simple. The concept of free will tells us that we have the ability to choose between different options without being completely determined by external or internal forces. This concept, defended by philosophers like Kant, asserts that we are responsible for our actions because we have the power to choose independently. Yet when you delve into neuroscience, you begin to realize that this view may be a bit naive. Research, such as that by Benjamin Libet, a neuroscientist, shows that before we make a conscious decision, there is already electrical activity in the brain indicating which direction we are about to take. In other words, the choice may not be as free as we imagine. The brain, apparently, already knows what we are going to choose, and consciousness merely follows the decision as if it were a mere spectator. And here is where Freud steps in with an even more intriguing perspective. He believed that most of our decisions do not come from reason or conscious freedom, but rather from deep forces operating in the unconscious. If you are thinking that the answer to the question of free will is even more elusive than you imagined, like the video and share it with your friends. Together, let's discover how Freud viewed this concept and the impact it has on our lives. If you thought that free will was a simple matter, prepare yourself. Freud's theory about the human mind will challenge that view profoundly. For Freud, what we call free choices are not always as free as they seem. Freud believed that the human mind is composed of three main components: the id, the ego, and the superego. Each of these exerts a powerful influence on our decisions and behaviors, often without our awareness. The id, for example, is the primitive part of our psyche, dominated by unconscious instincts and desires. It seeks immediate pleasure and the satisfaction of its needs without considering the consequences. On the other hand, the ego is the part of our mind responsible for reason and reality. It attempts to balance the impulses of the id with the demands of the real world. The superego, in turn, is the moral component, formed by the norms and values we have learned throughout our lives. Imagine the following situation. You are at a party, and someone offers you a delicious dessert. Your ID shouts, "Eat it now, you deserve it." Your superego responds, "No, you're on a diet. Think of the consequences." And your ego, trying to mediate this conflict, decides that you can have the dessert, but in moderation. Now, what you might not realize is that these forces are constantly working in the background, shaping your choices and decisions. According to Freud, we are often governed by impulses from the id and the pressure of the superego, not by pure reason or the free rational choice we believe we have. Freud stated that many of our actions are guided by repressed desires, those that have been excluded from our conscious awareness but still affect our choices. These desires can manifest in subtle ways, such as through dreams or slips of the tongue, what he called Freudian slips. Therefore, our decisions, no matter how much we try to rationalize them, may be deeply rooted in unconscious conflicts. Practical example. Suppose you always find yourself in dysfunctional relationships, even though you claim to desire something healthier. Freud would suggest that the unconscious is at work here. Perhaps you learned from childhood that love involves suffering, or that you unconsciously feel more comfortable with dynamics of control and dependency. This may be directing your choices without you realizing it, regardless of your conscious intention. Did you know that often the decisions we make are not merely rational choices, but a true battleground among different forces within us? These forces, according to Freud, are represented by the id, the ego, and the superego. And this internal conflict might be the reason why we feel so indecisive or confused when faced with certain choices. Imagine the following scenario. You have just arrived home after a stressful day at work, and the only thing you want is to relax by watching TV and eating something comforting, like a plate of pasta. The idea immediately kicks in, pushing you toward immediate pleasure, seeking satisfaction without considering the consequences. It desires the pleasure of food and rest without worrying about tomorrow. However, the superego steps in and begins to question. Shouldn't you be taking care of your health? You promised yourself you'd stick to your diet. That's not right. The superego is the internal voice of morality, of ethics, shaped by social rules and the values we have learned throughout life. Finally, the ego, the mediator, tries to balance this internal dispute. It knows that the id wants pleasure, and the superego demands adherence to the rules, but it must act in a realistic and balanced manner. The ego might decide that perhaps eating little pasta, but in moderation, is the best choice, pleasing the id while not being too harsh on the superego. This is the type of conflict that constantly occurs in our minds, often without us being fully aware of it. Freud believed that these internal battles are the root of many of our behaviors, and that our decisions are frequently not as free as we like to believe. For example, when you act impulsively without thinking, it is the id taking control of the situation. And when you act in a rigid and inflexible way, such as following an extremely restrictive diet, it might be the superego dominating. The ego, which seeks to balance these forces, often feels overwhelmed and, as a result, may end up making decisions that are neither one thing nor the other, a mix of yielding to pleasure and adhering to morality, but without true control. Practical example. Think of a moment when you felt guilty about something you did, yet at the same time experienced pleasure in doing it. Perhaps you made a mistake at work, but the satisfaction of having acted impulsively or deviating from the norm alleviated some of your stress. This is the conflict between the id and the superego, mediated by the ego, which, in trying to resolve the situation, ends up feeling divided. This internal process is fundamental to understanding why so many of our decisions are not completely free. By delving into this conflict, we can begin to see how it subtly shapes our choices far more than we imagine. Have you ever felt that your choices are beyond your control, as if something deeper were influencing your life? This is the essence of what Freud called psychic determinism, a concept that challenges the idea of free will and suggests that our actions are often guided by unconscious forces and past events. Freud believed that our mind is not merely a battlefield between the ID, the ego, and the superego in the present, but that our life experiences, especially those from childhood, play a crucial role in determining what we do and how we react. According to Freud, the unconscious is a repository of repressed memories, unresolved desires, and traumas that we are often not even aware we carry. Yet these unconscious elements profoundly influence our choices and behaviors. For example, a childhood trauma may affect the way you react to stressful situations as an adult. Perhaps you experienced emotional abandonment in your early years, and as a result, unconsciously, you constantly seek approval or feel insecure in relationships. These experiences, which you might not remember or directly associate with your current behavior, still largely determine your choices and reactions. This is the central point of psychic determinism. We are often governed by elements of the past which are deeply rooted in our unconscious. Freud suggested that what we believe to be free choices are often just automatic responses conditioned by past stimuli that we cannot consciously control. Practical example: imagine that in a work meeting, you have the chance to ask for a promotion, but you feel an inexplicable resistance and cannot speak up. Freud would say that this behavior might be the result of a previous experience. Perhaps you were discouraged by authority figures during childhood, or you learned to avoid standing out to escape criticism. These experiences shape your present reactions without you realizing it. No matter how much we try to act freely, unbound by the past, our unconscious mind carries significant baggage. For Freud, the unconscious is not an abstract concept. It has a direct impact on what we do in the real world, and thus, free will, it seems, is much more limited than we would like to believe. Now that we understand how the unconscious and internal forces can limit our free will, the big question arises: how can we achieve a true sense of freedom in the face of these invisible influences? Freud's answer, though complex, offers us a vision of hope. Psychoanalysis may be the key to unlocking that potential. Freud believed that by bringing repressed and unconscious content to light, a person could begin to understand what is truly driving their actions. He used dream interpretation as one of the most powerful tools to access the unconscious. For Freud, dreams are the direct expression of repressed desires and conflicts that we cannot express consciously during the day. They are like a window into the unconscious. Imagine that, by analyzing a recurring dream, you discover it is linked to a deep fear of rejection, perhaps originating in childhood. This kind of insight can be a turning point in someone's life, for by making that fear conscious, you gain the power to react differently without the interference of ignorance and repressed fear. From that moment on, you begin to see choices and behaviors more clearly and with greater control. True freedom, according to Freud, does not lie in escaping the forces that shape us, but in understanding them and, with that knowledge, being able to make more authentic decisions. By becoming aware of the unconscious mechanisms that shape our decisions, we can make choices that are more aligned with our true desires, rather than being guided by external or internal forces we do not fully understand. We have already discussed how the unconscious and internal conflicts can limit our free will. But now, let's turn our attention to the external world and the social and cultural forces that also play an important role in our choices. Although Freud focused on the individual psyche, he also recognized the impact of society on shaping our identity and, consequently, our decisions. We live in a society that constantly imposes standards, norms, and expectations on us. From a young age, we are conditioned to follow social, familial, and cultural rules that shape what we consider to be right or wrong. Freud referred to these as social influences and saw them as powerful forces that also interfere with our freedom. Have you ever wondered why we often make decisions based on what others expect of us? If you have ever felt pressured to pursue a specific career or even adopt a lifestyle that isn't genuinely yours, it might be because social and cultural norms are deeply rooted in our unconscious. These norms can be seen as an extension of the superego, but on a much larger scale, as they represent the expectations of society as a whole. Advertising campaigns, beauty standards, and models of success. All of these shape what we should desire and how we should live. And even though many of these influences are not obvious or direct, they silently affect our decisions, often limiting our true freedom. Practical example. Imagine you grew up in a culture that values material success above all else, and because of that, you feel constant pressure to achieve that success, even if it means neglecting other important aspects of your life, such as personal relationships or health. Although you believe you are making free choices, Freud would suggest that in reality, you are being governed by an unconscious desire for approval and social validation, a reflection of the cultural superego. These external pressures, alongside the internal influences of the id and superego, demonstrate that our free will in practice is more restricted than we would like to admit. Many of our choices are not only the result of internal conflict, but also the complex interplay between personal desire and external expectations. We come to the big question: do we really have free will? If we look at everything we have discussed so far, the unconscious, the internal conflicts between the ID, the ego, and the superego, and the social and cultural influences that shape us, Freud's answer seems rather shocking. True freedom may be an illusion. Freud never completely denied the human ability to make decisions, but he believed that these decisions are always conditioned by forces of which we are not fully aware. In his view, free will is not an absolute concept, but an illusion created by our inability to perceive all the factors that shape our behavior. In practice, this means that the choices we believe we have may be much more limited than we imagine. We may even feel that we are making free and conscious decisions, but often we are simply responding to unconscious impulses or external influences that we do not notice. However, this does not mean we are completely at the mercy of these influences. By understanding how the unconscious past experiences and external pressures shape our choices, we can gain a greater capacity for self-understanding. This understanding does not give us total control over our lives, but it does offer us the possibility to make more informed, conscious, and authentic decisions. Practical example: if you realize that your life is being guided by behavioral patterns imposed on you in the past, whether through unresolved traumas, cultural expectations, or social pressures, you begin to understand what is truly at stake in your choices. This self-knowledge can be liberating, For by recognizing these influences, you can start making decisions that are more aligned with your real desires and values rather than being guided by invisible forces. Therefore, although Freud shows us that free will, as we traditionally understand it, is limited and conditioned, he also gives us a powerful tool to achieve a true form of freedom: self-awareness. By exploring the deepest aspects of our psyche, we can begin to live more authentically, making decisions that are more aligned with our true selves rather than with the molds imposed by external expectations or unconscious desires. After everything we have discussed, we can conclude that the concept of free will, as traditionally understood, is more complex than we imagine. Freud reveals that our choices are not completely free, but rather influenced by internal forces, such as the unconscious and the conflict between the ID, the ego, and the superego, and by external pressures from society and culture. This may seem discouraging at first. After all, if we do not have complete control over our choices, what remains for us? The good news is that although free will is conditioned by factors we often do not perceive, this does not mean we are completely powerless. On the contrary, Freud provides us with a key to achieving true freedom: self-knowledge. By understanding how the unconscious shapes our choices, and by recognizing the external influences that affect our decisions, we can begin to make more conscious and authentic decisions. Psychoanalysis and introspection become powerful tools, allowing you to understand behavioral patterns you may not have noticed and to break free from the invisible chains that limit your potential. True freedom does not lie in having unlimited choices, but in making informed decisions based on understanding who we are and what drives us at a deeper level. That is liberating. Practical example, you might notice, for instance, that you tend to make impulsive decisions when you feel stressed, leading to harmful choices such as procrastination or overeating. By beginning to understand that this reaction is an unconscious response to an unresolved fear or trauma, you can work to change that behavior, seeking healthier ways to cope with stress and making more conscious choices for your life. Therefore, even if the illusion of complete free will is shattered, the real power of choice is not lost. By becoming more aware of your internal motivations and the external forces that influence your life, you gain a deeper and truer control over your decisions, steering your life toward where you truly desire to go. In summary, even though free will, as traditionally understood, is limited by unconscious impulses and external pressures, the key to true freedom lies in self-knowledge. By understanding Freud's teachings and recognizing the forces that shape our decisions, we can begin to make more conscious choices that align with our genuine desires. If this video has sparked your interest in this journey of self-discovery, share it with your friends and subscribe to the channel to continue exploring topics that deepen our understanding of the human mind. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.